But I don't know if you've ever had things you look forward to in life that when life gets here, sometimes it's like when I finally get the right job, when I finally get married, or when I finally have kids, or when I have kids, when my kids are finally school age and they're in school, when my kids finally graduate, when my kids finally are out of the house, man, that empty nest, they can be such an inconvenience when they move back in, can't they? But if we're not careful, life is like a carrot on a stick. Always out there, one more thing. When this happens, when that happens, when that happens, then life is going to be good. It's just the way it's supposed to go. And in this last chapter of Nehemiah, in one sense, he did what he's supposed to do. But life kept going. And in verse 1, it says, on that day that the book of Moses was read aloud in the hearing of the people, and there it was found written that no Ammonite or Moabite should ever be admitted into the assembly of God, because they had not met the Israelites with food and water, but had hired Balaam to call a curse down on them. Our God, however, turned the curse into a blessing. When the people heard this, they excluded from Israel all who were of foreign descent. Before this, Eliashib, the priest, had been put in charge of the storerooms of the house of our God. He was closely associated with Tobiah, and he had provided him with a large room formerly used to store grain, the grain offerings and incense and temple articles, and also the tithes of grain, new wine, and olive oil prescribed for the Levites, musicians, and gatekeepers, as well as the contributions for the priests. But while all this was going on, Nehemiah speaking here, he says, I was not in Jerusalem. For in the 32nd year of Artaxerxes, king of Babylon, I had returned to the king. Sometime later, I asked his permission and came back to Jerusalem. Here I learned about the evil thing Eliashib had done in providing Tobiah a room in the courts of the house of God. He just came back and learned about it. You think somebody would have texted him, right? And let him know. But first, who was Tobiah? He was an Ammonite official. And throughout Nehemiah chapter 2, chapter 4, and chapter 6, he was like one of the leaders who was mocking being a pain in the butt to Nehemiah and the people of Israel. So the question is, how did Tobiah, who was not Jewish, he was not even a follower of the Jews, how did he get a room in the temple? Good question. Glad I asked that for you. So, who was the priest in charge of those storerooms? Eliashib, who also happened to be married to Tobiah's daughter. Isn't that something? See, we really have to be careful about who we marry. It's the second most important decision you'll ever make in your life. Do you have the same values? And even through life, we all must be aware of who influences our lives and how they influence us. So Nehemiah comes back to this scenario. So what did he do? He responded to the situation. He said, I was greatly displeased, and he threw all Tobiah's household goods out of the room. Translation, he cleaned house. I gave orders to purify the rooms, and then I put back into them the equipment of the house of God with the grain offerings and the incense. I also learned that the portions assigned to the Levites had not been given to them, and that all the Levites and musicians responsible for the service had gone back to their own fields. So I rebuked the officials and asked them, why is the house of God neglected? Then I called them together and stationed them at their posts. The people of Israel were not bringing their offerings into the storehouse for the Levites. I don't know if you're a staff person here, if you can imagine how rude it would be for the people to stop giving, right, Jasmine? It would just be terribly rude of all of the rest of us to do that. Amen. I hear that up there. But that's what took place. So people stopped giving. Maybe that's why the storerooms were empty. So the Levites had to make a living. They had families to provide for too. So when no money was coming in, that meant they had to go back to the fields to work. And then they couldn't carry out their responsibility of the temple duties and the spiritual oversight of the people. And then the storehouse of God became a storage unit. So then what happened? All Judah brought the tithes of grain, new wine, and olive oil into the storerooms. Nehemiah said, I put Shelemiah the priest, Zadok the scribe, and a Levite named Pedaiah in charge of the storerooms. It doesn't say so, but guess who lost his job? Eliashib. He's not mentioned here anymore. And he made Hanan, son of Zachar, the son of Mattaniah, their assistant, because they were considered trustworthy. Are you considered trustworthy? The way you're living right now, the way you're acting, the way you're talking, communicates to the people around you, you are trustworthy, or I'm not quite so sure about that person. These people had proven themselves somehow in some way as being trustworthy. So they were made responsible for distributing the supplies to the fellow Levites. Situation that came along, he didn't plan for it. Nehemiah dealt with it. He wasn't done yet, though. Going on to verse 15, Nehemiah says, in those days, I saw people in Judah treading wine presses on the Sabbath and bringing in grain and loading it on donkeys together with wine, grapes, figs, and all other kinds of loads. And they were bringing all this into Jerusalem on the Sabbath. That was a big no-no in those days. The Sabbath was set aside as a day to honor God. They were not to do work of any kind. The Pharisees in the time of Jesus really carried it to extremes, but it was a day set aside for sure for no work. So how did Nehemiah respond? Therefore, since he saw this, I warned them against selling food on that day. People from Tyre who lived in Jerusalem were bringing in fish and all kinds of merchandise, selling them in Jerusalem on the Sabbath to the people of Judah. I rebuked the nobles of Judah and said, what is this wicked thing you're doing, desecrating the Sabbath? Didn't your ancestors do the same thing so that our God brought all this calamity on us and on this city? Now you are stirring up more wrath against Israel by desecrating the Sabbath. And then down to verse 22, then I commanded the Levites to purify themselves and go and guard the gates in order to keep the Sabbath holy. So the issue here was the Sabbath. They were disregarding what the Sabbath was meant for. Now, I don't know if you've ever wondered why sometimes, right now, even this morning, we are setting aside time in our busy lives to come here to worship together. Hopefully, most of you are not on your cell phones right now while I'm doing all this important talking. But you set aside time, we come together for a purpose, like you do at a retreat or a Bible camp. And what are we going without as we are here? We're coming here without the distractions of home. Hopefully, we're coming here with less distractions of social media. And I thought, maybe the idea of a Sabbath would make a difference in our lives if we were aware and cut back on what distracts us. Maybe if we were aware of what distracts us from God and do something about it, we would more easily focus on God. When cell phones first came out, I don't even know when that was, there was a full page ad on, I think it was USA Today. The top part of the whole ad said, "The good news is you are available 24 hours a day." The bottom half said, "The bad news is you are available 24 hours a day." These things can be such a distraction. They can be such a substitute. This is just my personal feeling, is that you should never confuse texting with communicating. Don't ever try and solve a problem, especially relationally, by texting. Do you know that when I text, you don't know my tone of voice? You don't know the expression on my face that might say, "I can't believe you did that, you idiot." Or my expression might say, "Oh, you're so wonderful. I love you, honey." Can't communicate anything. And when I'm kind of ticked off, I will interpret what's written on here differently than when I'm in a wonderful mood. Same words. It almost communicates what I want it to communicate, for good or for bad. You ever texted your prayer to God? "Dear God, I need help speaking to these people right now." It would seem kind of silly, because you'd say, "Dean, why don't you just talk to God? Then he can talk to you." And with the Sabbath, part of the heart is you set aside time, you set aside distractions to somehow connect with God. And that's what we're even doing here this morning. If you're playing the odds, the less distractions increases the odds, at least in my mind, of us connecting with God, or of him connecting with us in our hearts. So they were not honoring the Sabbath. Then Nehemiah had one more issue. Comes across. Verse 23. "Moreover, in those days I saw men of Judah who had married women from Ashdod, Ammon, and Moab. These people were all enemies of the Jews in the past history. Half of their children spoke the language of Ashdod or the language of one of the other peoples and did not know how to speak the language of Judah. I rebuked them and called curses down on them. I beat some of the men and even pulled out their hair. I made them take an oath in God's name and say, 'You are not to give your daughters in marriage to their sons, nor are you to take their daughters in marriage for your sons or for yourselves.' Was it not because of marriages like these that Solomon, the king of Israel, sinned?" See, even the wisest man in the whole world, Jesus said Solomon was the wisest man. He was brought down. And he's telling the people, you people are no different than Solomon. There was no king like him. He was loved by his God, and God made him king over all Israel. But even he was led into sin by foreign women. Must we hear now that you too are doing all this terrible wickedness and are being unfaithful to our God by marrying foreign women? Who they married was an indication of their relationship with God. The next verse 28 said, one of the sons of Joiada, son of Eliashib, remember the priest who lost his job? The son of Eliashib, the high priest, was son-in-law to Sanballat the Horonite, and I drove him away from me. Eliashib's own son married the daughter of another gentleman who was one of the antagonists bringing people down. Our choices in life reflect our relationship with God or our lack of relationship with God. Then he ends by saying, remember me with favor, my God. Another situation dealt with. A long time ago, some of you might have known her, June Robertson. She led a Bible study out in Twig, out in a barn, and that I experienced, and it became the first time in my life I'd seen kids my own age, when I was a kid, excited about God. And later in her life, she said, I used to think that you get to some stage in your spiritual life when you're old, that you'll just kind of be able to handle everything. And she said, you know what I found? She says, I found that life's getting harder. Life's getting harder. And we all know that's not supposed to happen, right? Life according to selfish me, it's not supposed to get harder. This book doesn't end with, and they lived happily ever after. The end. It just keeps going. I grew up in a home where it wasn't a sin to play cards. I hope that doesn't offend some of you. But you play rook. No. And when you play cards, sometimes whatever the game is, you're going, I got a good hand here. I'm going to beat these suckers. I'm going to win. And then sometimes you got a hand that goes, nuts. This is terrible. What am I going to do? I'm going to lose this one. And then in the midst of that terrible hand, you might pick up a card that goes, oh, this changes everything. I got a shot at this. So when you're playing cards, you have to play the hand you're dealt with. You joke around when you're playing, you go, who dealt me these terrible cards? Oh, I did. Sorry. Sometimes in life, you have to play the cards you're dealt with. Not sometimes, all the time. And sometimes in life, you have no choice and there was no reason whatever happened. You didn't make a poor choice. It just happened. Sometimes in life, you make a poor choice and you're reaping what you sowed. See, when Nehemiah came, he was back in the other country, and he says, I'm going to come build a wall. That's all he was going to do. I'm going to build the wall. And he focused on it with all the people. They built the wall, in 52 days, I think it was. And in the process of rebuilding the wall, Nehemiah did not plan anything that happened to him during that time or even after. He didn't plan on the opposition that took place, but he dealt with it. He didn't plan on the mistreatment of the Jewish people by the Jewish people when they were charging their own people interest, taking financial advantage of them, but he dealt with it. He didn't plan on the temple storeroom becoming a storage unit, but he dealt with it. He didn't plan that the people would quit giving, and he dealt with that. He didn't plan on the misuse of the Sabbath. He dealt with that. All that is called life. Life happens. Things happen that you don't expect. When Mary Jo and I retired from Breckenridge, we moved back to our home in Hermantown, so one I grew up in and we raised our 4 kids in. It had been rented for 12 years or so. And amazingly, it looked like a home that had been rented for 12 years or so. That wasn't funny. You should have seen our faces when we walked in the door. All we knew, in my mind when we were coming back, is that we had been saving money from the rent and everything. We were going to gut the kitchen and put in a brand new kitchen. That's the only thing in my mind we were going to do for sure. And along the way, having an electrician son-in-law, he put in 200 amp service for us instead of 100 amp. I ended up using a trencher, digging a trench. Good thing, huh? So we put all our power in underground. And when I was under there, I thought, you know what? I'm going to cut this cable wire. Because we don't need it. Our renters had it. So I cut the cable wire. Mary Jo comes out, Dean, we don't have internet. Didn't plan on that. We ordered patio doors. They had them on a forklift at Menards. We waited 3 months for them. They were here to this row away from us. Boom, they fell off on the parking lot. Blacktop. Didn't plan on that. I had run wiring for lights in our back room, and then I'd put up styrofoam for insulation because we gutted that room too, among other things. And so then we hooked up all the wires, and my electrician son-in-law came over, hooked up the switch, turns the switch on. He looks at me and goes, that's not good. And when he says that's not good, I think that's not good. So I had already sheetrocked the ceiling, finished it really nice, and found out that somehow there's a break in the wire between the first light and the switch that I hadn't planned on. And what I ended having to do after much consternation, I had to cut a trench in this beautiful brand new ceiling from the light all the way across to the open wall. And then I had to run another wire up and over and pay another $150 to have my guy make it look brand new. I hadn't planned on that. Now, our house is pretty much done. In the midst of everything I planned, and in the midst of everything I didn't plan, and we're better able to live out one of our dreams of using our home to invite people over, a place for grandkids to come and play. I got my basketball hoop up in the backyard, campfire area, and so many things happen along the way that I didn't plan, just like your life. See, you never arrive in life. I have not been the perfect weight since I was 6 pounds, 12 ounces. All right? Life doesn't stay the same. Life will never stay the same. Nehemiah found that out. He came to do one thing, and life continued to happen, and he dealt with it. And the challenge we face in life is to wisely and rightly deal with the hand we're dealt with. Now, I find in marriage it's much easier to blame your spouse for anything, but it's not an effective strategy, okay? How do you wisely and rightly deal with the hand you're dealt with? That's what Nehemiah did throughout all his leadership. See, the tangible thing that Nehemiah did was he led the people in rebuilding the wall. The intangible is that he also, more importantly, led them in rebuilding and living out their trust in God. How we live out every day exemplifies our trust in God. And sometimes life happens and it's really hard to trust in God. Because whatever happened was not supposed to happen in life. It just wasn't. But this is the hand you're dealt with. No one can play it except you. And we need God's help to play that hand. And I won't make even a joke about some of you not playing with a full deck, okay? Sometimes you're playing cards, you play that, put that card down, and you go, oh, you idiot, I shouldn't have played that. I should have held it and we played this one instead. Life's the same way. You make this choice and go, oh, why'd I do that? I should have done this. We're so much wiser after the fact, aren't we? Often. But people could look around at the wall. Look what Nehemiah helped us do and led us to do. But more importantly, in a sense, they could look at each other as a people and say, look how he impacted our lives. Lord willing, that's the impact we should have on people's lives.